Emily had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible. Behind the polished reception desk of the Grand View Hotel, she smiled professionally, checked guests in and out, and pretended she didn't notice things other people missed. She pretended she didn't remember every face, every conversation, every tiny detail that crossed her path. Because the last time she'd used her photographic memory and observational skills, it had cost her everything. But on a Tuesday morning in September, when a powerful man accused a vulnerable woman of theft, Emily would have to choose: stay invisible and safe, or risk everything again for the truth.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Grand View Hotel lobby, casting geometric patterns across the marble floor. Emily Martinez stood behind the reception desk, her fingers moving automatically across the keyboard as she processed a guest checkout. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her navy blue blazer pressed and professional, her smile practiced and pleasant. To anyone watching, she was the picture of competent ordinariness. But beneath that carefully constructed surface, Emily's mind worked like a high-definition camera, constantly recording. She noticed that Mr. Henderson in room 304 was limping slightly this morning, favoring his left ankle. Mrs. Chen had changed a perfume from Chanel to something floral and cheaper, suggesting financial stress. The businessman from room 512 had a fresh coffee stain on his right cuff, which meant he was left-handed and had been rushing, probably late for a meeting. Emily saw all of this. She always had. Ever since childhood, she'd possessed what her mother called an uncanny memory, and what her college roommate had termed freaky observation skills. She could recall conversations from months ago, word for word. She could reconstruct entire scenes from memory with photographic accuracy. She could read patterns in human behavior that others missed entirely. For years, she'd thought it was a gift, until it became a curse. The memories still burned fresh, despite 5 years passing. Emily had been a junior at Columbia University, studying criminal psychology. She had noticed inconsistencies in the research data being published by Dr. Richard Caldwell, the department's most celebrated professor. Small things at first, numbers that didn't quite align, dates that contradicted each other. Her photographic memory had caught what everyone else missed. She'd been naive enough to think truth mattered more than reputation. She'd reported her findings to the academic board, armed with her detailed observations and documented evidence. The investigation had proven her right. Dr. Caldwell had been fabricating data for years, building his career on lies. Emily should have been celebrated. Instead, she became a pariah. Dr. Caldwell had been beloved, a mentor to dozens of students, a friend to faculty members. When he was forced to resign in disgrace, the blame somehow shifted to Emily. She was called ambitious, cutthroat, a social climber who'd destroyed a good man's career for her own advancement. Friends stopped returning her calls, professors treated her coldly. She'd been right, but she'd been alone. That was when Emily learned that being right wasn't enough. Sometimes being right made you the villain. She dropped out of Columbia 3 months before graduation, moved to a different city, took a job that required no particular skills, no standing out, no using the abilities that once filled her with pride. For 3 years, she'd worked at the Grand View Hotel, deliberately dimming her own light. She forced herself not to comment when she noticed things. She trained herself to forget details that her brain automatically stored. She became aggressively, determinedly ordinary. It was safer that way. "Good morning, Ms. Martinez." A smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. Emily looked up to see Mr. Davidson approaching the desk. Richard Davidson was 55, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in suits that probably cost more than Emily's monthly salary. He stayed at the Grand View once or twice a month for business, always booking the executive suite, always demanding extra attention. "Good morning, Mr. Davidson," Emily replied with a professional smile. "Checking out today?" "Yes, unfortunately. Business calls me back to Boston." He placed his key guard on the counter. his Rolex watch relenting in the morning light. "I trust my bill is ready?" "Of course, sir. Give me just one moment." Emily pulled up his account, her eyes scanning the charges. Despite her determination to stay detached, she couldn't help but notice details. Mr. Davidson had made 3 calls to the same local number over the past week, each lasting exactly 7 minutes. He charged 2 dinners to his room, but the portions suggested he'd dined alone both times despite requesting 2 sets of silverware. He requested his room be cleaned at 8 a.m. sharp every morning, unusually specific. None of it was her business. Emily printed the invoice and handed it over. "Everything looks in order, Mr. Davidson? Would you like this charged to the card we have on file?" "Yes, that's fine." He glanced at the paper, barely reading it. "You know, Miss Martinez, you are very efficient, always so quiet and competent, unlike some of the staff here." Emily's internal radar pinged. There was something in his tone, an edge of condescension mixed with something else. Calculation, perhaps. But she kept her expression neutral. "We all try our best, sir." "Indeed. Though I had to say the cleaning staff leaves something to be desired. That woman, Grace, I think her name is, I've had to request she not service my room. She is quite careless." Emily's hand paused, fractionally over the keyboard. Grace Santos was one of the most meticulous cleaning staff members at the hotel. Emily had observed her work, the careful attention to detail, the way she folded towels in perfect thirds, the way she always left mints centered exactly on pillows. Careless was the last word anyone would use to describe Grace. But Emily said nothing. It wasn't her place. It wasn't safe to notice. She finished processing the checkout, handed Mr. Davidson his receipt, and wished him a pleasant journey. He was halfway to the door when it happened. Mr. Davidson stopped abruptly in the center of the lobby, his hand going to his wrist. He spun around, his face contorting with anger. "My watch," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the space. "My watch is missing!" Emily's stomach tightened. Several guests in the lobby looked up from their newspapers and phones. "Your watch, sir?" "My Patek Philippe," he said, striding back to the desk. His voice was rising, performance quality outrage. "It's worth $15,000, and it's gone. It was on my dresser this morning when that cleaning woman came through." At that exact moment, as if summoned by fate's worst timing, Grace emerged from the elevator bay, pushing her cleaning cart. She was a small woman, 32 years old, but with the kind of tired eyes that suggested a much harder life. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform clean but worn. Mr. Davidson's eyes locked onto her like a predator spotting prey. "There she is," he announced to the lobby at large. "That's the woman who was in my room this morning. She's the only one who could have taken it." The lobby seemed to freeze. Grace's face went pale, her hands gripping the cart handle. Emily felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct she'd spent 3 years suppressing suddenly screamed for attention. Because Emily knew. She knew with absolute certainty that something was very wrong with this picture. Emily's mind raced through the morning's events with perfect clarity. At 7:23 a.m., Mr. Davidson had walked through this exact lobby to get a newspaper from the stand near the door. She'd glanced up, offered a good morning, and noticed specifically that he was wearing his expensive watch because the light had caught on its face as he'd reached for the paper. Grace hadn't even started her shift until 7:30 a.m. The timeline didn't work. But speaking up meant revealing she remembered such specific details, meant drawing attention to abilities she'd buried. As Mr. Davidson's voice grew louder and Grace's eyes filled with silent tears, Emily faced an impossible choice. Let an innocent woman be destroyed to keep herself safe? Or risk becoming visible again?
"I want security called immediately," Mr. Davidson demanded, his voice filling every corner of the lobby. "I want this woman searched, and I want the police involved. This is theft, plain and simple." Grace stood frozen, her lips trembling. She didn't defend herself, didn't speak at all. She just stood there, absorbing the accusation like someone who'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. Emily felt something crack inside her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had 5 years ago when she'd first noticed Dr. Caldwell's data inconsistencies, the uncomfortable, insistent pull of truth demanding to be acknowledged. "Mr. Davidson," Emily said quietly, stepping out from behind the desk, "perhaps we should handle this matter more privately. If you'd like to come to the security office, we can review the situation calmly." "I don't want calm. I want my property returned, and I want this thief held accountable." Several guests had pulled out their phones. Emily could see the social media nightmare unfolding in real time. She looked at Grace, who still hadn't said a word, and made a decision that terrified her. "Sir, please come with me to the security office, both of you." Emily's voice was firmer now, leaving no room for argument. "This is hotel policy for all theft accusations." Mr. Davidson looked irritated but nodded curtly. "Fine, but I'm calling the police the moment we're done here." Emily led them through the staff door behind the reception desk, down a short hallway to the small security office. It was a cramped room dominated by monitors showing CCTV feeds from throughout the hotel. The security guard, Marcus, looked up in surprise. "Marcus, I need the room for a few minutes. Guest situation." Marcus, who'd worked with Emily long enough to trust her judgment, nodded and stepped out. Emily gestured for Mr. Davidson and Grace to sit in the 2 chairs facing the desk. She remained standing, positioning herself in front of the monitors. "Now then," Mr. Davidson began immediately, "I want this woman's bag searched. The watch was on my dresser at approximately 7 a.m. this morning. When I returned from breakfast at 9:30 a.m., it was gone. She was the only person in my room during that time." Emily's brain was processing rapidly. She looked at Grace. "Grace, did you clean Mr. Davidson's room this morning?" Grace nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, miss. From 8 to 8:30 like the schedule. And did you see a watch on the dresser?" "No, miss. I cleaned the dresser. There was no watch." "She's lying," Mr. Davidson said flatly. "Of course she'd lie. $15,000 is probably more money she makes in a year." Emily felt anger flash through her, but she kept her expression neutral. She turned to the monitors, fingers moving across the keyboard. "Mr. Davidson, would you mind if we check the security footage? It would clear this up quickly." "By all means," he said confidently. "The footage will prove exactly what I'm saying." Emily pulled up the camera feed for the 5th floor, where Mr. Davidson's executive suite was located. She scrolled back to 7 a.m. Her photographic memory was already painting the scene she needed to find, but she had to be careful. She couldn't reveal too much too quickly. At 7:15 a.m., the footage showed Mr. Davidson exiting his room. Emily paused the frame. Even in this somewhat grainy security footage, the watch was clearly visible on his wrist, catching the hallway lights. "There," Emily said, pointing to the screen. "This is you leaving your room at 7:15 a.m. You're wearing the watch." Mr. Davidson leaned forward, squinting at the screen. I could see the slightest tension in his jaw. That must be a different watch. I have several." Emily's heart rate increased, but she kept her expression neutral. "A different Patek Philippe? You mentioned it was quite distinctive, a limited edition." "I misspoke," he said quickly. "I meant I have multiple expensive watches. Perhaps that's a different one." Emily pulled up another angle, this one from the lobby camera. "This is you at 7:23 a.m., getting a newspaper." She zoomed in as much as the resolution allowed. The watch was clearly visible, and more importantly, I could make out part of the distinctive face design. "This appears to be the same watch. The blue dial is quite unique." Mr. Davidson's face was reddening. "What exactly are you implying, Miss Martinez?" "I'm not implying anything, sir. I'm just trying to establish a timeline." Emily pulled up the footage from 8 a.m. Here's Grace entering your room to clean, as scheduled. And here she is exiting at 8:31 a.m. Emily rewound and played the footage at normal speed. Grace was visible entering with her cleaning cart, and 31 minutes later, exiting with the same cart. Her movements were unhurried, routine. Nothing suggested someone who had just committed a theft. "She could have hidden it in the cart," Mr. Davidson insisted. "She could have," Emily agreed. "But you stated the watch was on your dresser at 7 a.m. The footage shows you wearing it at 7:15 and 7:23. So either it was never on the dresser or—" She trailed off, watching Mr. Davidson's face. He was a smart man. He knew where this was going. "Or I don't remember correctly," he finished, his tone shifting. "The stress of the morning, you understand. Perhaps they were to breakfast and didn't realize." "Perhaps," Emily said softly. She pulled up more footage, her fingers moving with practiced ease across the keyboard. "This is you returning to your room at 9:33 a.m., and here you are leaving again at 9:47.
In the 9:47 footage, Mr. Davidson emerged from his room carrying his briefcase. His movements caught my Emily's attention immediately. He paused just outside his door, glanced both ways down the hallway, and adjusted something in his briefcase with a quick, furtive movement. "That's when I discovered it missing," Mr. Davidson said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "I went back to my room after breakfast, couldn't find the watch, and realized it had been stolen." Emily said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about 6 weeks ago. On a Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Davidson had been in the lobby, speaking with another guest. Emily, working the desk as always, had overheard their conversation. Mr. Davidson had been boasting about his new watch, a Patek Philippe, grand complications, limited edition, only 50 made worldwide. He said, and Emily remembered his exact words, "It's irreplaceable. There's no other watch quite like it in the world."
If there was only one, he couldn't have multiple. The different watch explanation was a lie. Emily made a decision. It was time to stop hiding. "Mr. Davidson," she said quietly, "6 weeks ago, on a Wednesday afternoon at approximately 3:15 p.m., you were standing in the lobby near the concierge desk. You were speaking with a gentleman in a gray suit about your Patek Philippe. You said it was a grand complications, limited to 50 pieces worldwide. You specifically said, and I quote, 'There's no other watch quite like it in the world.'" The silence in the room was absolute. Mr. Davidson stared at her, his face going from red to pale. How could you possibly remember that?" "I remember everything," Emily said simply. "It's how my brain works. I remember that conversation. I remember you wearing that exact watch in the lobby this morning at 7:23. I remember you've stayed here 8 times in the past 6 months. I remember that Grace has cleaned your room during 5 of those stays, and you've never had a single complaint about her until today." She pulled up one more piece of footage. "And I remember something else. 2 months ago, on July 15th, there was an incident in the hotel restaurant. A waitress reported that you'd made her uncomfortable with inappropriate comments. The complaint was dismissed because you're a valued guest. 6 weeks before that, a female valet reported a similar incident. Also dismissed." Mr. Davidson stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You're accusing me." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm simply stating facts. The footage shows you wearing your watch this morning. You claimed to have multiple identical watches of a limited edition piece, and there's a pattern of complaints from female staff members that have been overlooked." She turned to Grace, who was staring at Emily with wide eyes. "Grace, did something happen between you and Mr. Davidson during a previous stay?" Grace's hands twisted in her lap. Her voice was so quiet they could barely hear her. 3 weeks ago, he asked me to bring extra towels to his room. When I did, She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "He tried to touch me. I said no and left quickly. The next day, he complained to management that I'd been rude to him. I was given a written warning." Emily felt cold fury wash through her, but she maintained her composure. She looked at Mr. Davidson. "So when Grace continued to reject your advances and refused to service your room, you decided to retaliate. You created a theft accusation to get her fired, possibly arrested. You chose this morning because you knew the lobby would be busy, knew there would be witnesses, knew that it would be her word against a wealthy guest's." "This is absurd," Mr. Davidson sputtered, but he was backing toward the door. "You have no proof of any of this. You're making wild accusations based on what? Your supposed perfect memory? Any lawyer would tear that apart in seconds." He was right, and Emily knew it. Her memory, no matter how accurate, wasn't legal proof. And Mr. Davidson was powerful, connected, exactly the kind of man who could make problems disappear. But Emily wasn't done. "You're right," she said. "My memory isn't proof, but this might be." She pulled up the footage from 9:47 again, the moment Mr. Davidson had adjusted something in his briefcase outside his room. She enhanced the image as much as possible
and froze it. The resolution was poor, but there was a glint of something metallic visible as he'd opened the briefcase. "That's not," Mr. Davidson started. "I'm not saying what it is," Emily cut him off. "But here's what I propose. You open your briefcase right now. If the watch isn't there, I'll apologize profusely for wasting your time. But if it is there—" She let the implication hang in the air. Mr. Davidson's hand tightened on his briefcase. The room felt suffocatingly small, the three of them locked in a moment that would determine everything. Emily watched his face carefully, seeing the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his options: call her bluff and risk having the watch found in his possession, or admit defeat. But then his expression changed to something Emily didn't expect: a slow, calculated smile. "You're quite clever, Miss Martinez," he said softly. "Much more clever than you pretend to be. That makes me curious. What exactly are you trying to hide?"
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Emily felt her blood run cold. There was something in Mr. Davidson's tone that suggested he knew more than he should. He set his briefcase down carefully on the desk and looked at her with an expression that was almost amused. "You want me to open this?" he asked. "Fine. I have nothing to hide. But first, let's talk about you, Miss Martinez. Or should I say, Emily Martinez? Former Columbia University student? The one who destroyed Professor Richard Caldwell's career." Emily's carefully constructed mask cracked. "How do you—" "I know Richard Caldwell personally," Mr. Davidson said smoothly. "We're colleagues of sorts. He consulted on several of my company's projects. After his unfortunate dismissal, he told me the whole story about the brilliant student with the photographic memory who couldn't leave well enough alone." Grace looked confused, glancing between them, but Emily couldn't look away from Mr. Davidson. Her past had just walked into the room and sat down beside her present. "Richard always said you were gifted. Photographic memory, perfect recall, observation skills that bordered on supernatural. He said you could have been the best forensic psychologist in the country if you hadn't been so—" He paused. "Self-righteous." "He was fabricating research data," Emily said, her voice tight. "People make medical decisions based on that research. He was putting lives at risk." "He was building a career," Mr. Davidson countered. "And you destroyed it because you couldn't understand that sometimes the greater good requires small compromises. Richard told me you just disappeared after that. Dropped out of school, vanished from academia entirely. He always wondered what happened to you." Mr. Davidson picked up his briefcase again, holding it almost protectively. "And here you are, working a reception desk. Such a waste of talent. All that incredible memory, those observation skills used to check people in and out of hotel rooms. Why, Emily? Why would someone with your abilities choose to be invisible?" Emily felt like the walls were closing in. This was exactly what she'd feared for 3 years. Being seen, being known, having her abilities exposed and used against her. "Because I learned that being right doesn't matter if you're alone. I learned that people don't want truth, they want comfort." "Ah, but you see that's where you're wrong." Mr. Davidson opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately. Inside, Emily could see papers, a laptop, pens. No watch. People absolutely want truth. They just want it on their own terms. And right now, I'm offering you a truth. He pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the desk. "I've been recording this entire conversation. You've just admitted to having detailed memory of my private conversations, of tracking my behavior patterns, of monitoring my movements throughout the hotel. Some might call that surveillance. Others might call it stalking.
Her heart dropped into her stomach. That's not... And this young woman, he gestured to Grace, has just admitted that she entered my room alone, that there was an incident between us. She claims I harassed her, but she never reported it to the police, only to hotel management, and she continued to work here.
That's questionable, isn't it? Why would a victim continue working somewhere her harasser stays regularly? Grace's eyes went wide with fear. I need this job. I have papers to... She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Davidson's smile widened. Papers? Immigration papers, perhaps. Are you here legally, Ms. Santos? The trap had been sprung, and Emily realized with sickening clarity that she'd walked right into it. Mr. Davidson had never cared about the watch. This had been about something else entirely. Here's what's really happening, Mr. Davidson said, leaning back in his chair. 3 weeks ago, Ms. Santos rejected my advances. I don't appreciate rejection. So yes, I fabricated a theft accusation, but not to get her fired, though that would have been a pleasant bonus. I did it to draw you out, Ms. Martinez. Me? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I've been staying at this hotel for 6 months, and for 6 months I've been watching you. You're very good at pretending to be ordinary, but there are tells. The way your eyes track everything, but you never comment. The way you remember details, but pretend you don't. I started testing you, dropping information, creating patterns, and you noticed everything, but you never said a word. He tapped the recorder. My company specializes in corporate intelligence. We investigate fraud, corporate espionage, competitive threats, and we're always looking for people with unique skills. Someone with your memory and observation abilities would be invaluable. But I needed to know if you'd hidden those skills away permanently, or if the right motivation could bring them back out. Emily felt sick. This was all a test? Everything's a test, Ms. Martinez, and you passed. You revealed your abilities to protect someone vulnerable. That's exactly the kind of moral compass we need, tempered by your experience with consequences. You know what happens when you stand up for truth, and you did it anyway. That's valuable. He slid a business card across the desk. My company would pay you triple what you make here. You'd use your skills for legitimate investigative work, corporate fraud, financial irregularities, the kind of work where your photographic memory would be an asset, not a liability. And if I refuse, Emily asked. Mr. Davidson's smile never wavered. Then I play this recording to hotel management, showing how you've been surveilling guests, accessing security footage without authorization, and making wild accusations against a valued client. Ms. Santos here faces questions about her immigration status, and I still file a police report about my stolen watch, naming her as the primary suspect. You're blackmailing us, Emily said. I'm offering you a choice. Use your gifts in a place that values them or watch them destroy you both. You have 48 hours to decide. He stood, collected his briefcase and recorder and walked to the door. Then he paused, looking back. By the way, the watch is in my briefcase, hidden compartment in the lining. You were right about everything, Ms. Martinez. That's exactly why I want to hire you. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Emily stood frozen, her mind reeling. Grace was crying silently in her chair. The security office felt like a cage. I'm so sorry, Emily finally said. I thought I was helping. She shook her head. You did help. You believed me. Nobody ever... She couldn't finish the sentence. Emily pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. Her perfect memory was replaying the entire conversation, analyzing every word, every nuance. And slowly, something started to bother her. Mr. Davidson had been too prepared, too smooth. The recording device had been queued up and ready to play. The business card had been in his pocket, easily accessible. This entire scenario had been choreographed. But there was something else, something in his performance that didn't quite fit.
Emily closed her eyes, replaying the conversation in her mind with perfect clarity. When Mr. Davidson had mentioned Dr. Caldwell, he'd said they were colleagues of sorts, and that Caldwell had consulted on several of my company's projects. But Emily remembered something else. 3 years ago, before she dropped out of Columbia, she'd researched every aspect of the data fabrication case, looking for any detail that might explain why Dr. Caldwell had done it. She'd found nothing unusual except for one small note in a newspaper article. Dr. Caldwell had briefly worked for a corporate consulting firm called Meridian Analytics before joining Columbia. She opened her eyes and looked at Grace. What did Mr. Davidson say his company does? Grace wiped her eyes. Corporate intelligence? Investigating fraud? Emily pulled up a web browser on the security computer and typed quickly. Meridian Analytics. The website company loaded, showing a sleek corporate design, providing comprehensive solutions for business intelligence and competitive analysis. She clicked through to the leadership page, and there, listed as Vice President of Operations, was a familiar face, Richard Davidson. But that wasn't what made Emily's breath catch. It was the name of the company's founder and CEO, Richard Caldwell. The same Dr. Caldwell whose career Emily had destroyed, the same man who'd lost everything because of her. This wasn't a job offer. This was revenge. Emily stared at the computer screen, her mind racing through implications. Dr. Caldwell hadn't disappeared after his academic disgrace. He'd reinvented himself in the private sector, and now his company was targeting her, using Grace as bait. But why go through such an elaborate scheme? Why not just confront her directly? Unless there was something else going on, something Emily hadn't seen yet. She pulled up the hotel's guest records, her fingers flying across the keyboard. If this was really about revenge, Mr. Davidson would have left traces, and with her perfect memory, Emily would find them. What she discovered made everything she thought she knew suddenly, terrifyingly wrong.
Emily's hands trembled as she dug deeper into the hotel's computer system. She pulled up Mr. Davidson's complete stay history, credit card records, even his restaurant bills. Grace watched silently, seeming to understand that something had shifted. "What are you looking for?" Grace finally asked. "I don't know yet," Emily admitted. "But something's wrong. This whole thing is too elaborate for simple revenge." She stared at the records, her photographic memory cataloging every detail. Mr. Davidson had stayed at the Grandview 8 times in 6 months. Each stay was exactly 5 days long. Each stay was charged to Meridian Analytics' corporate account. Each stay included the executive suite, room 527. Room 527. Emily pulled up a building schematic of the hotel. The executive suite on the 5th floor had a specific layout: bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, and a small study. But more importantly, it shared a wall with room 526. She checked the guest records for room 526. Over the past 6 months, during each of Mr. Davidson's stays, room 526 had been occupied by different guests, always single occupancy, always paying cash, never the same person twice. Emily's investigative instincts, dormant for 3 years, roared back to life. "Grace, do you remember anything unusual about Mr. Davidson's room? Anything at all?" Grace thought for a moment. "He always kept the study door closed. Every time I cleaned, he specifically told me not to enter that room. He said it had confidential business materials." "Did you ever see inside?" "Once. About 3 weeks ago. The door was slightly open, and I accidentally pushed it when I was vacuuming. There were wires. Lots of wires and equipment. I thought maybe he had computer servers or something for his business." Wires, equipment, a room that was always off limits, a shared wall with a room that had rotating cash-paying guests. Emily felt pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed was disturbing. She pulled up the hotel's maintenance records.
2 months ago, there had been a complaint from room 526 about strange sounds in the walls. The maintenance report said they'd found nothing unusual. She searched deeper, accessing archive footage from the 5th floor hallway cameras. She went back 3 months to Mr. Davidson's 3rd stay. She watched at high speed, looking for patterns. And there it was. At 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night, a man had entered room 526. 20 minutes later, at 12:07 a.m., the same man had exited, carrying a large envelope. The timestamp was important because Emily remembered something else. That same night, there had been a major corporate merger announced. Meridian Analytics had somehow predicted it and advised their clients to invest accordingly, making millions. Emily pulled up more footage from different dates. Each time Mr. Davidson stayed, the pattern repeated. Different people entering room 526 at odd hours, always carrying something when they left, and each time corresponded with Meridian Analytics making a suspiciously well-timed business move. "Oh, God," Emily whispered. "He's bugging room 526. The wires, the equipment in his study, he's set up surveillance. He's listening to the guests next door." "But why?" Grace asked. Emily pulled up the guest records for room 526 again, this time looking at the names more carefully. She ran them through a quick internet search. The results made her stomach turn. Every single guest in room 526 had been a high-level corporate executive, a CFO of a pharmaceutical company, a VP of technology for a software firm, a board member of a major bank, all people who might have confidential information, all people who might talk about sensitive business matters in what they thought was a private hotel room. Meridian Analytics wasn't just a corporate intelligence company. They were engaging in corporate espionage, using the hotel as their base of operations. And they'd been doing it at least 6 months, possibly longer. But that still didn't explain why they'd targeted Emily specifically. Unless... Emily pulled up the hotel's employee records, her heart pounding. She searched for any connection between Grandview Hotel staff and Meridian Analytics. Nothing came up directly. But then she tried a different approach. She searched for any Grandview employees who'd worked at Columbia University. One result, Marcus Chen, the security guard. Before working at the Grandview, he'd been a security officer at Columbia for 7 years. Marcus, who'd conveniently left the room when Emily needed to use the security office. Marcus, who had access to all the hotel's security footage. Marcus, who could easily cover up any evidence of Mr. Davidson's activities. Emily's mind raced. If Marcus was working for Meridian Analytics, then he'd been watching her for months, reporting back to Caldwell and Davidson. They'd known about her photographic memory because Marcus had observed her, noticed the way she worked, the way she remembered things. But they still didn't explain why they'd orchestrated this entire scenario with Grace. If they wanted to recruit Emily, why not just offer her a job? Why the elaborate scheme? The answer hit her like a physical blow. They weren't trying to recruit Emily. They were trying to compromise her. Emily pulled up the recording of today's events from the security office camera. Mr. Davidson had said he'd been recording their conversation, but the security office had its own cameras. She watched the footage, saw Mr. Davidson pull out his recording device, saw myself admit to remembering detailed personal conversations with guests. If that footage got out, if the Meridian Analytics leaked it, Emily would be unhirable anywhere. She'd be seen as someone who violated guest privacy, who couldn't be trusted. She'd be destroyed professionally, just as she had destroyed Dr. Caldwell. But there was more. If Emily took the job with Meridian Analytics under these circumstances, she'd be complicit in their illegal surveillance operation. They'd have leverage over her forever. She'd be trapped, forced to use her abilities for corporate espionage, unable to refuse because they could expose her supposed surveillance of hotel guests. It was brilliant, in a horrifying way. Dr. Caldwell had spent 3 years planning this revenge, not just destroying Emily's career, but corrupting her, turning her into exactly what she had accused him of being, someone who compromised ethics for personal gain. "We need to call the police," Grace said suddenly. Emily shook her head. "And tell them what? That we think there might be surveillance equipment in a guest's room? Mr. Davidson checked out. By the time police get a warrant, if they even believe us, the equipment will be gone, and we have no proof that connects any of this to corporate espionage." "But you saw the patterns, the guests." "Patterns aren't proof," Emily learned, the hard way. "And Mr. Davidson has a recording of me admitting to tracking guest behavior and accessing security footage. If we go to the police, he'll use that to discredit everything we say." Grace stood up, her earlier fear replaced with determination. "So we do nothing? We let them win?" Emily looked at this small woman who'd been victimized by a powerful man, who'd been used as bait in an elaborate trap, and who was now ready to fight back despite everything she had to lose, and Emily realized something. She'd spent 3 years hiding because she'd been alone, but she wasn't alone. "No," Emily said slowly, "we don't let them win. But we need to be smarter than them." She pulled out the security footage again, this time focusing on Marcus. She watched his patterns over the past 6 months, tracking his movements with her photographic memory, and she found something interesting. Every time Mr. Davidson stayed at the hotel, Marcus's shift schedule changed. He always worked nights, always had access to the security office during the hours when room 526 had its mysterious visitors. But there was one exception. 4 weeks ago, Marcus had called in sick for 2 nights. A substitute security guard had covered his shift. And during those 2 nights, there had been no visitors to room 526, despite Mr. Davidson being in residence. "Marcus is definitely involved," Emily said. "He's part of the operation, but that means he's also a liability for them." She pulled up Marcus's employment file. He'd been hired at the Grandview 3 years ago, right after Emily had started working there. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "They planted him here to watch me," Emily said. "They've been planning this for 3 years, waiting for the right moment." "What moment?" Grace asked. Emily thought back to 3 weeks ago when Grace had rejected Mr. Davidson's advances. That's when everything had accelerated. But why? She pulled up the news, searching for corporate stories from the past month. And there it was. Meridian Analytics was facing a federal investigation for insider trading. The SEC was looking into how they'd consistently predicted market moves with suspicious accuracy. Dr. Caldwell's company was in trouble, and they needed a fall guy. "Oh no," Emily breathed. "This isn't just revenge, they're setting me up." "For what?" "For everything. If the federal investigation finds the surveillance equipment, they'll trace it back to the hotel, and they'll find security footage of me accessing the system, monitoring guests, admitting to remembering private conversations. They'll make it look like I was the one running the surveillance operation, selling corporate secrets." Grace's eyes widened. "They're going to frame you for what they did?" "It's perfect," Emily said, her mind racing through the implications. "They approach me with a job offer under duress. If I refuse, they leak the footage and I look like a stalker who violated guest privacy. If I accept, I become complicit in their operation. Either way, when the investigation comes, they have someone to blame who isn't Dr. Caldwell or Mr. Davidson." She stood up, pacing the small room. "And by using Grace as the catalyst, they ensured I'd reveal my abilities in a situation that could be twisted. I thought I was defending an innocent person, but they'll make it look like I was covering up my own surveillance operation." "So what do we do?" Grace asked. Emily stopped pacing. Her photographic memory was working overtime, processing every piece of information, every detail she'd observed over the past 6 months. The guests in room 526, their companies, the timing of market moves, Marcus's involvement, Mr. Davidson's patterns. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, being silent, because she learned that truth without power was useless. But this time, she didn't just have truth. She had something else. She had evidence that not even Meridian Analytics knew existed. "Grace," Emily said slowly, 3 weeks ago, when you accidentally saw inside Mr. Davidson's study, you said there were wires and equipment. Did you see anything else? Anything specific?" Grace thought hard. "There was a laptop, I think, and notebooks. One of them was open and I saw numbers. Lots of numbers and dates." Emily felt electricity run through her. "Did Mr. Davidson see you looking?" "Yes, that's when he asked me to bring extra towels later alone. When I refused his advances, he got angry. He said I should be more grateful for my job, that he could make problems for me." "That's when he started planning this," Emily said. "He realized you'd seen something you shouldn't have, so he needed to discredit you preemptively. If you ever tried to testify about what you saw, they'd destroy your credibility by bringing up today's false accusation." "But I didn't understand what I saw, just numbers." "You didn't need to understand. You just needed to be a potential witness." Emily pulled up the security footage from 3 weeks ago, the day Grace had accidentally seen the study. She watched the footage carefully. There, at 2:47 p.m., Grace's cleaning cart had bumped the study door, pushing it open slightly. Grace had glanced inside for maybe 3 seconds before Mr. Davidson had appeared and shut the door. But that wasn't what made Emily's heart race. It was what happened 5 minutes later. Mr. Davidson had emerged from his room, gone down to the lobby, and made a phone call from the house phone. Unusual behavior for someone with a cell phone. She zoomed in on his face during the call. His expression was worried, almost panicked. He'd called someone immediately after Grace saw the equipment. He was afraid she'd seen too much. She pulled up the phone records. The call had been to a local number. She traced it. A law office, specifically a lawyer who specialized in immigration law. Her blood ran cold. "He investigated you immediately," she told Grace. "As soon as you saw the equipment, he found out about your immigration status. That's how he knew exactly how to threaten you." Grace's face paled. How could he find that out so fast? Meridian Analytics specializes in corporate intelligence. They have resources, connections. But that also means they keep records, detailed records. She turned back to the computer, her mind working through possibilities. If Dr. Caldwell was running an illegal surveillance operation, he'd need documentation, not for legal purposes, but for leverage. Information was currency in corporate espionage, and you didn't collect currency without cataloging it. The question was, where would they keep those records? Emily thought back to her time at Columbia studying criminal psychology and investigative techniques. One thing she'd learned: people who commit methodical crimes are creatures of habit. Dr. Caldwell had been meticulous in his data fabrication, creating elaborate false documentation. He wouldn't have changed his nature. She pulled up information about Meridian Analytics' office location. They were based in Boston, but they had a satellite office here in the city. The address was familiar. Emily closed her eyes, letting her photographic memory work. 2 months ago, a man had checked into the hotel for a 3-day stay. He'd been nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. He'd paid in cash and had requested a room on the 2nd floor, specifically asking for one facing the street. Emily had thought it odd at the time, but hadn't commented. The man had given his company name as Meridian Analytics when filling out the registration form. Emily had processed his checkout and remembered his business card, which had listed the local office address. But there was something else. The man had left a newspaper in the lobby folded to the classified ad section. One ad had been circled in red pen. Storage units available, climate-controlled, 24-hour access. At the time, Emily had filed it away as meaningless, but now... "Oh no, they're keeping records off-site," Emily said suddenly. "Somewhere they think is safe. A storage unit." "How does that help us?" Grace asked. "Because," Emily pulled up a map of the city, "if we can find where they're storing their documentation, we have real evidence, not just patterns and suspicions, but actual proof of corporate espionage, proof that would interest the FBI, not just local police."
She traced her finger across the map, thinking. The nervous man from Meridian Analytics was looking at storage units. There were dozens in the city, but only a handful offered climate-controlled units with 24-hour access near Meridian's satellite office. Emily narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. Then she remembered something else. The man had complained about the traffic during his stay, mentioning he had to drive across town multiple times a day. That suggested the storage unit wasn't near the hotel. One location remained. Secure Space Storage, 15 miles north. I think I know where they keep their records, Emily said, but I need to be sure before we go to the authorities. And we need insurance. Insurance? Emily turned to Grace. Everything we've discovered, everything I remember, we need to document it. If something happens to us, if Meridian Analytics tries to discredit or harm us, someone else needs to know the truth. She pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly, documenting every detail of her investigation, the guest patterns, the surveillance equipment, Marcus's involvement, the connection to Dr. Caldwell. She included timestamps, specific observations, everything her photographic memory had cataloged. I'm going to email this to someone who can help, Emily said. Someone outside this situation who can verify everything independently. Who? Emily paused, then made a decision that terrified her. She pulled up the Columbia University website and found that contact information for Professor Angela Torres, the one faculty member who'd quietly supported Emily during the Dr. Caldwell investigation. Professor Torres had believed her then, even when it cost her professionally. Emily wrote the email carefully, explaining the situation, attaching her documentation, and asking Professor Torres to hold the information securely. If Emily didn't contact her again within 48 hours, she should take everything to the FBI. She hit send, feeling like she had just jumped off a cliff. Now what? Grace asked. Emily looked at the clock. It was 3:47 p.m. Mr. Davidson had given them 48 hours to decide. But Emily wasn't going to wait. Now, she said, we go on the offensive. Emily had a plan, but it required doing something she had avoided for 3 years, trusting someone with the truth about her abilities. She picked up the phone and dialed the FBI's Boston field office, her hand steady despite her racing heart. When the agent answered, Emily took a breath and said, "My name is Emily Martinez, and I have information about a corporate espionage operation. But before I tell you anything else, you need to know something about me. I have a photographic memory, and I can prove everything I'm about to tell you." The agent was silent for a long moment, then said words that changed everything. "Miss Martinez, we've been investigating Meridian Analytics for 6 months. We've been hoping someone on the inside would come forward. Tell me everything."
The FBI agent's name was Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, she'd confirmed immediately when Emily had asked. Agent Chen listened to Emily's entire story without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Emily finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "Ms. Martinez, you understand this is an extraordinary claim," Agent Chen said. "Corporate espionage, illegal surveillance, a frame job spanning 3 years. We'll need verification." "I can verify everything," Emily said. "I have photographic memory of guest records, conversation timestamps, behavioral patterns. But more importantly, I think I know where they're keeping physical evidence. Secure Space Storage. Unit number unknown, but registered under Meridian Analytics Satellite Office. We've been monitoring Meridian Analytics financial records and communications," Agent Chen admitted. "We suspected they were running an intelligence operation, but we couldn't find their collection point. If you're right about the storage unit, this could be the break we need." "There's something else," Emily said. "They're planning to frame me for their operation. Within 48 hours, they'll either force me to join their company under duress or leak security footage that makes me look like I was running the surveillance. Either way, I become their fall guy when your investigation goes public." "That's consistent with their pattern," Agent Chen said grimly. "Meridian Analytics has been linked to 3 similar cases in other cities. In each case, they compromised a low-level employee and made them the face of the operation, while the executives walked away clean. We've never been able to prove the connection." "Because they're careful," Emily said. "Dr. Caldwell learned from his academic scandal. He doesn't leave obvious trails." "But he did leave you," Agent Chen said thoughtfully. Someone with perfect memory who's been observing his operation for 6 months without knowing it. Ms. Martinez, how would you feel about helping us build a case? Emily looked at Grace, who'd been listening to the conversation on speakerphone. Grace nodded encouragingly. What do you need me to do? Emily asked. Over the next hour, Agent Chen outlined a plan. Emily would accept Mr. Davidson's job offer wearing an FBI wire. She'd document everything about Meridian Analytics' operation from the inside. Meanwhile, the FBI would get a warrant for the storage unit based on Emily's testimony and their existing investigation. But there was a catch. We need you to do this for at least 2 weeks. We need documented proof of active espionage, not just historical records. Can you handle being inside that company, working for the man whose career you destroyed, knowing he's planning to betray you? Emily thought about the past 3 years. She'd spent them hiding, diminishing herself, pretending her abilities didn't exist. She'd been so afraid of being alone again that she'd chosen to be nobody at all. But Grace had reminded her of something important. Her abilities had value when used to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I can handle it, Emily said, but I need something in return. Grace Santos, the cleaning staff member who was falsely accused, she needs protection, immunity for any immigration issues, a path to legal residency. She's a witness and she's vulnerable. There was a pause. That's not usually within our jurisdiction. Make it within your jurisdiction, Emily said firmly. Grace has information about the surveillance equipment. She saw inside Mr. Davidson's hotel study. Her testimony will corroborate everything. But if she's deported or threatened, you lose that witness. Another pause. Then, I'll talk to our immigration liaison. If her testimony is as valuable as you suggest, we can probably arrange something. But Ms. Martinez, you need to understand the risk you're taking. If Meridian Analytics suspects you're working with us, they won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. I know, Emily said, but I'm done hiding. The next morning, Emily called Mr. Davidson's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice smug. Ms. Martinez, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you made your decision? I'll take the job, Emily said, keeping her voice neutral. But I have conditions. You're not really in a position to negotiate. I think I am. You need me specifically, someone with my skills who you already have leverage over. If you wanted just any investigator, you wouldn't have spent 3 years setting this up. So here are my terms. I want double the salary you offered, written contract, and a guarantee that Grace Santos won't be touched. No deportation threats, no more harassment. You've developed a spine, Ms. Martinez. I'm impressed. Fine, your terms are acceptable. Come to our office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We'll start your onboarding. I'll be there. Emily ended the call. She wore the FBI wire hidden under her conservative blouse when she walked in to Meridian Analytics the next morning. The office was sleek and modern, all glass and steel. Mr. Davidson met her in the lobby with a professional smile, as if they'd never had their confrontation in the hotel security office. Welcome to Meridian, Emily. May I call you Emily? Of course, she said, smiling back. He led her through the office, introducing her to various team members. Everyone was polite, professional, utterly normal. If Emily hadn't known what was really happening, she would have thought it was just another corporate workplace. And then, Mr. Davidson took her to Dr. Caldwell's office. Richard Caldwell was older than Emily remembered, his hair completely gray now, deep lines around his eyes. But his expression when he saw her was complicated. Not quite triumphant, not quite angry, something more nuanced. Ms. Martinez, Richard told me you'd accepted our offer. I'm glad you chose to use your talents productively rather than destructively this time. The words stung, but Emily kept her expression neutral. I learned from past mistakes, Dr. Caldwell. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than it appears. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Indeed it is. Welcome to Meridian Analytics. I think you'll find we approach information gathering with much more sophistication than academic research. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily documented everything. The surveillance equipment they used, the methods for installing it in hotel rooms, the clients who paid for stolen corporate secrets. She learned that Marcus wasn't just a planted security guard.
He was one of dozens of compromised employees Meridian had placed in hotels, office buildings, and corporate centers across the country. She learned that the storage unit contained not just records of past operations, but active intelligence on current targets. Companies Meridian planned to infiltrate, executives they planned to compromise, trade secrets they planned to steal. And she learned that Dr. Caldwell, despite his bitterness about his academic downfall, had never actually intended to frame Emily for his crimes. That had been Mr. Davidson's idea. Richard is too sentimental, Davidson told Emily during a late-night work session, not knowing she was recording. He wanted to offer you a legitimate job, show you that your abilities could be used for profit. But I knew we needed insurance. If the FBI investigation got close, we needed a scapegoat. You were perfect. Former Columbia student with a grunge, worked at the hotel where our operation was based, had the skills to run the surveillance. The narrative writes itself. And Dr. Caldwell agreed to this? Emily asked carefully. He didn't know the specifics. Richard likes to stay above the operational details. He just wanted to prove to you that he'd moved beyond academia, that he was successful despite what you did to him. I'm the one who understands that success requires hard choices. Like framing innocent people? Emily asked. Like protecting the company. Don't look so horrified, Emily. You're wearing a wire right now, aren't you? Emily's blood turned to ice. Davidson smiled at her shocked expression. I've known since your second day here. You think we don't screen our employees? We found the FBI surveillance request in your background check. The question is, what are we going to do about it? He stood up, walking to the window. Here's what I propose. You keep working with the FBI. You give them everything they want about our surveillance operation. In return, I give you information about something much bigger. A conspiracy that involves FBI agents taking payoffs to ignore corporate crime. Agent Sarah Chen specifically. Emily's mind raced. Was he lying? Or was there another layer to this conspiracy? You're trying to corrupt the investigation, she said. I'm trying to show you that everyone is corrupt. The FBI, corporations, academic institutions, everyone compromises their ethics for something. Power, money, security, revenge. You're the only person I've ever met who genuinely believed in absolute truth. That's why Richard never really hated you, you know. He admired your integrity as you destroyed him. I don't believe you about Agent Chen. Then don't. Keep your wire running. Turn in whatever evidence you want. But remember this conversation when you see how the system really works. When you watch guilty people walk free because they have the right connections. When you realize that your perfect memory and pure intentions change nothing.
The FBI raided Meridian Analytics 3 days later. They found everything. The storage unit filled with documentation, the surveillance equipment, the client lists. They arrested Mr. Davidson, Dr. Caldwell, and 17 other employees. Agent Chen was not corrupt. Davidson had lied. One final attempt to make Emily doubt everything. But he'd been right about one thing. The system was complicated. Dr. Caldwell received a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against his co-conspirators. He'd cooperated fully, and Emily learned that he genuinely hadn't known about Davidson's plan to frame her. I wanted to hire you legitimately, Caldwell told her during a supervised conversation before his sentencing. I wanted to show you that I'd learned from my mistakes, that I'd built something real. But Richard Davidson, he saw you as a tool, nothing more. I'm sorry, Miss Martinez, for all of it. Emily nodded. She didn't forgive him. What he'd done was still wrong, but she understood him better now. He was human, flawed, trying to rebuild after a catastrophic failure. Not so different from her, really. Grace received her residency documentation 6 months later, fast-tracked as a protected witness. She left the hotel and enrolled in community college, studying business management. Emily attended her graduation 2 years later, proud of the strong woman who'd emerged from that frightening morning in the hotel lobby. As for Emily herself, she made an unexpected decision. She didn't return to Columbia to finish her degree. Instead, she accepted a position as a consultant with the FBI's white-collar crime division, not as an agent, but as a specialist in pattern recognition and memory analysis. She used her abilities, but on her own terms. She worked cases involving corporate fraud, corruption, and exploitation. She helped people who couldn't help themselves, and she never again pretended to be ordinary. Because Emily had finally learned the truth about her gift. It wasn't a curse that isolated her. It was a responsibility that connected her to something larger than herself. The ability to see what others missed, to remember what others forgot, that wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about bearing witness to truth in a complicated world. She still thought about that morning in the hotel lobby sometimes, about the moment when she'd had to choose between safety and integrity. It had seemed like an impossible choice then, but looking back, Emily realized it had been the easiest decision she'd ever made, because the only thing more painful than standing alone for truth was living a lie to avoid being lonely. And Emily Martinez, with her photographic memory and keen observation skills, would never forget that lesson. She'd spent 3 years learning to hide. It had taken just one moment of courage to remember how to shine.
Emily's story wasn't about supernatural abilities or dramatic transformations. It was about something much more real, the courage to be yourself in a world that often punishes authenticity. Her photographic memory wasn't magic, it was a natural variation in human capability, something that made her different but not superhuman. The real change in Emily's life didn't come from her abilities. It came from her choice to use them despite knowing the cost. She'd been hurt before by standing up for truth, and she chose to stand up again anyway. That's the kind of heroism that exists in real life. Not fearlessness, but action despite fear. Grace's story mattered too. She represented the countless people who live in vulnerable positions, whose voices are ignored, who absorb injustice because fighting back seems too dangerous. Emily's choice to defend Grace wasn't just about stopping one false accusation. It was about refusing to accept a world where power always defeats justice. And perhaps most importantly, the story showed that truth is complicated. Dr. Caldwell was neither a simple villain nor a victim. He'd committed academic fraud, but he'd also been manipulated by Davidson. Emily had been right to expose him, but that didn't mean she'd been wrong to understand him as a complex human being. In the end, Emily learned that being extraordinary isn't about being perfect or always being right. It's about being honest with yourself, with others, about what you see and what you know. It's about using whatever gifts you have, whether photographic memory or simple compassion, to make the world slightly more just. Because ordinary people can have extraordinary impact, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through everyday choices to stand up when it matters, to speak truth when it's uncomfortable, and to protect those who can't protect themselves. Emily's real superpower wasn't her memory. It was her willingness to be vulnerable enough to care, even after she'd been hurt. And that's a power anyone can choose to have.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.